The French Revolution. Our essential question is what conditions led to the French Revolution? The old regime, French society, was divided into three classes or estates. The first estate is the clergy. It's owned, they owned 10% of French land and collected tithes, which was 10% religious tax for church. They did not pay any direct taxes to the state. High-level clergy, like bishops, usually came from noble families and often acted as such. The second estate is the nobility. So they're descendants of wealthy land-owning medieval lords. King Louis XIV had crushed their military power and made them subservient to the king, but had given them privileges to please them, such as key positions in government and military, and freedom from taxation. They had already lost much of their former power and feared losing more of it to the wealthy and educated members of the Third Estate with whom they competed for key positions. The Third Estate. The Third Estate is everyone else. Although artificially grouped together as commoners, the Third Estate was actually very diverse. The bourgeoisie is the top of the Third Estate. They're wealthy and educated middle class. So the bourgeoisie is the middle class, wealthy and educated. It's composed of bankers, merchants, manufacturers, doctors, lawyers, and other professionals who resented their lower official status and lack of power despite their actual socioeconomic level. Now, the majority of the Third Estate was composed of poor urban workers and rural peasants who were responsible for paying all of the taxes, which were often excessive and, for the poorest members of the society, impossible to pay. If we look at this graphic, it shows us several things. So first, let's look at the political cartoon. Okay, so this character, A, is representing the First Estate, which remember is made up of clergy, and they actually went against Enlightenment ideas. B, this character, is the Second Estate, which is rich nobles. They hold the highest offices in government, and they also disagreed about Enlightenment ideas. And in the Third State, this character, he represents the Third Estate. This included the bourgeoisie, urban lower class, and peasant farmers, and they had no power to influence government. They embraced the Enlightenment ideas, and they resented the wealthy First and Second Estates. So if we look at this pie chart over here, this shows the population of France in 1787. So this large green area, that makes up the 97%, which is the Third Estate. The First Estate is this red sliver right here, that's 1%, and the Second Estate is this 2% of people, which is in the blue. Now let's see who's paying taxes. So the First Estate is 2%. They pay 2% of the taxes. The Second Estate pays 0%. And then the Third Estate pays 50% of their income in taxes. So you have two questions to answer. Number one, what is a political cartoon representing? What is the message? And number two, how do the chart and graphs help explain the political cartoon? So you can stop the video and answer those questions and then restart it. Let's look at some background issues that led to the French Revolution besides just the social classes. So France lost the 7 Years' War to the British, which left the government with enormous debts. The Enlightenment philosophy had become popular among the bourgeoisie, who began to call for changes to the government, increase political participation, and greater equality. The example of the American Revolution inspired the French people by showing them that it was possible for the people to take control from the established powers. The French military supported, the French military support for Americans against the British created an even greater debt. Population was on the rise in France, while at the same time, environmental changes caused several years of poor harvests, leading to serious food shortage, which led to a rise in prices. Bread was a staple of commoners, with families consuming 3 to 4 loaves per day, costing at least half of their wages, and when the bread prices doubled in 1789, riots broke out. We also have miserable monarchs. So the kings of France continued to borrow money and increase debt to fund their lavish lifestyles. When the weak Louis XVI became king, his financial advisor told him to reduce spending for the court and begin taxing the nobles and clergy, but they forced the king to fire him. The kings were living extravagantly at this time period. They taxed the society to pay for their luxuries, their hunting trips, their extravagant wardrobes, food, all kinds of stuff, even their jewelry. Louis XVI's wife, Marie Antoinette, was hated by the French people because she was Austrian, which was one of France's former enemies. And because she wasted money on gambling and luxuries, she earned the nickname Madame Deficit. I have a movie preview to show you from a movie that was made in 2006 representing Marie Antoinette.
Friendship between Austria and France must be cemented by marriage. My youngest daughter, Antoine, will be Queen of France.
It is a custom that the bride retain nothing belonging to a foreign court.
You represent the future. All eyes will be on you.
She looks like a child. So, I've heard you make keys as a hobby?
Yes. It'll be interesting to see how long she lasts.
What on earth is going on with that young couple?
It's a disaster.
This is ridiculous.
This, madame, is Versailles.
I'm afraid the Queen has a somewhat artistic temperament.
It's not too much, is it?
No.
She spends like mad.
People of France are hungry. The King and Queen are complete blunderers.
Don't they ever get tired of these ridiculous stories?
Can't you do something?
I'm not going to acknowledge it.
She was in the shrubs at dawn with various men.
He has quite a reputation.
She's a terrible queen.
Letting everyone down would be my greatest unhappiness.
The Bastille fortress was stormed.
There's a mob of hundreds on their way.
All right, so that was a little bit about Marie Antoinette. Of course, that was a Hollywood spin, but there was lots of historical content in it. When Louis XVI finally decided to tax the nobles, they forced him to call a meeting of the Estates General, which had not met in 175 years, so they could vote against his tax. The National Assembly, the revolt of the bourgeoisie. In 1789, delegates representing the three estates met in Versailles to deal with the crisis. The third estate was represented by Enlightenment-inspired bourgeoisie who complained of the abuses of the first two estates and demanded political reform. However, the voting system gave each estate a single vote, despite the fact that the third estate was 97% of the population, meaning the first and second estates would always win. Okay, so even though that the third estate made up of 97% of the people, they still only got one single vote. In protest, the third estate delegates declared themselves the National Assembly, representing the people of France with the right to make laws for the country. The National Assembly, the revolt of the bourgeoisie. Louis had them locked out of the meeting space, so they relocated to an indoor tennis court, along with a few of the nobles and clergy who supported them, and took the tennis court oath, swearing to stay until they had written a new constitution for France. Louis claimed to accept the assembly, but when he started moving troops into Paris, the people feared he would use force to restore his power. The storming of the Bastille, revolt of the popular masses. On July 14, 1789, mobs of hundreds of Parisians began gathering weapons and came to the Bastille, which was a medieval fortress used as a prison, demanding gunpowder. When the guards refused and fired on the crowd, the mob broke in, took over the building, and killed all of the guards, parading through the streets with their heads on pikes. The storming of the Bastille became a symbol of the revolution, as the prison represented the medieval tyranny of the old order and is celebrated today as a national holiday, Bastille Day, in France. And that's all for today.